We have talked about coal elsewhere under climate solutions and the need to phase out coal. I'm going to revisit this here in the context of a new paper which is based on large surveys, and in fact the authors have even written a book on the politics of coal. And the main message is that if you want to phase out coal globally, then you need to be aware of what are the regional issues that delay the phase out or even lead to new investments in coal, or offer no plans for phasing out. So we'll see how the countries are categorized in that sense. But first, to look at some numbers, this is the figure from International Energy Agency which talked about how annual changes in coal consumption by grade and use in China have gone. This is true for the world. Europe is suffering now and increasing coal use because of Russian invasion of Ukraine and the disruption to their gas supply. India is having to burn more coal because of the COVID issues and the perturbation disruption to the oil supply as well, and so on. So just China here, for example, 2020, 2021 led to a huge jump in coal consumption. You can see that here. So met coal is metallurgical coal or coking coal, which is coking coal, where coal is heated under very high pressure without oxygen to remove all the other materials and leave just hydrocarbon. It's much more efficient than the steam coal, for example. So steam coal is used for power as well as non-power usage. So the main point is that it jumped in 2021 for reasons of confluence of multiple factors, and is expected to drop back down to 2024. But the bigger news is not that optimistic either. So here Germany intends to phase out coal-fired power stations like this one in Nurat. This is from the Nature article. But there is headlines blaring already that Europe and Germany are firing up old coal plants, sparking fears climate goals will go up in smoke. This is now in August 2022, so it's the impact of the Russian invasion of Ukraine that I just mentioned. This we have discussed before as well. Climate goals always take a back seat when there are immediate crises of COVID or a war or whatever else, because you always have to make the tough choices on food, water, energy, etc. And climate as a whole may go in the back burner, when you need to worry about heating, cooling, and food production and so on. But even in the longer term context, there is a couple of ways to look at it. So these are CO2 emissions by fuel type for the whole world. You can divide this into countries, and you will see China is burning a lot. India is now increasing as well. But there are many geopolitical factors in it, in addition to the desire of these countries to lift their people into higher standards of living, for which you cannot blame them. So how do we deal with phasing out coal then? That's the main question. So looking at annual carbon dioxide emissions measured in tons per year, coal is still a significant chunk of up to 25% or more worldwide. Oil is still very much in play, so fossil fuels are not going anywhere. Gas adds some, and then cement, steel, flaring, and other industries together add on top as well. There's another way to look at it, and that's to just look at CO2 emissions by fuel to see how they have changed over time. As economies grow over, like in India and China, infrastructure demands go up and spending and construction goes up, so cement is becoming more and more. Flaring, which is raising a flag, and agreements have been made to tone them down, still contributes. And gas has gone up. Oil took a crash during the COVID, but it has recovered, and coal took a crash, but obviously it's recovering as well. But you can see that coal here is quite a bit higher than the other fossil fuels. There are also details about how some countries reduced their emissions. For example, US used fracking to extract more natural gas, but it exports coal. So how do you count for their emissions? So these are all tricky things. Nonetheless, if you look at when countries have promised to phase out coal power, This measures pledges to phase out coal from the electricity mix as a whole. So you have already coal-free countries because they either don't have it or can't afford to import them, or they have other resources. Like Chile is relying big on phasing out coal because it has a lot of potential for solar and wants to make itself more self-reliant by depending on those and removing the dependence on coal and gas. So there are countries which promise to phase out by 2030, Canada and US and some European countries. Is 2030 close enough, good enough? Well, depends on looking at the emissions gaps to global warming targets, so earlier the better. But as we said, Europe can backtrack on it based on what else happens to their energy supply from Russia, which is on an adventurous war right now. So those are always things to worry about. Phase out by 2040, so you can see some of the Eastern European countries and some countries here are already coal-free again because they are rich in oil, not necessarily because of environmental concerns. So overall emissions still have to be tracked. Phase out in 2040, so you can see some country here and no pledges from most other countries. So Sri Lanka and Nepal and Bhutan have made pledges, but India and China have not, and even Japan has not, but South Korea has, and so on and so forth. So there is a lot of regional, local geopolitics that are involved. So this Nature paper basically divides the coal countries, coal-using countries, into categories, so-called phase-out countries where less capacity under construction than is currently operating. So they're not planning to build new ones. No planned power plants beyond what's currently under construction. At least one plant retired since 2000. So that indicates practical phasing out. And these countries include Chile, Germany, United Kingdom, and United States. So Germany and the UK are much more progressive. US has complicated coal politics with West Virginia, Senator Manchin, and you may have heard of all those negotiations. So coal is also being exported, so it's not yet financially unviable to stop coal mining, coal export, and coal burning. Established coal-using countries include China, India, and Turkey, obviously. New capacity planned or under construction. Operating capacity at least equal to pipeline. Retired capacity less than operating capacity. So China and India would tell you that they don't have a choice when war happens or even when crunch comes. For example, China has faced one of the worst droughts in its last century, and water is very precious at this point. Crops are dying in the ground, so they have to decide between this food, water, energy nexus kind of thing, and what is the best way to deal with lack of water because of the drought. You burn more coal. So that's what China is doing as well. Phase-in countries, which are like Pakistan and Vietnam, which have basically no other means of either importing clean energy or investing in renewable energy, even though Vietnam has ramped up its investments in solar, for example. So coal pipeline here is greater than the operating capacity. So they may be investing in more coal when they can afford it, since that's a more reliable, more economical option for such countries listed under phase-in. Exporter countries, average coal production over 2010 to 2020, at least 1.5 times higher than consumption. This includes Australia, Colombia, Indonesia, and South Africa. There are differences. Indonesia is different than South Africa, which burns a lot of its coal. Colombia exports a lot. Australia exports almost all of it. These are generally considered extractive countries, so they do rely on mining, including for coal, to have a substantial fraction of the GDP coming from extractions, which are generally not considered a sustainable way, but coal is in particular something to worry about in terms of emissions. So here, looking at 4 categories of coal use, the distribution of coal-fired power plants differs widely around the world, so coal reduction strategies must account for local needs. That's the main message of this podcast and this paper, that you cannot have a global top-down kind of regulation or shaming and peer pressure to get countries to wean out of coal, as Saudi energy minister is supposed to have said at some point. The Stone Age didn't come to an end because they ran out of stones. Similarly, the coal age will not come out, it will not end because we run out of coal. There is a lot of coal which we can burn for another 800 years at least. So if coal is to remain in the ground, it has to be because it's not viable anymore as a economic energy source. Okay, so we are looking at phase-out countries, established countries, phase-in countries, Pakistan, Vietnam, we mentioned here, and there are also other countries. Export-oriented, Canada. So is it a good thing that they are exporting coal and that's getting burned elsewhere? Do they get a credit for not emitting coal CO2 when they are just exporting their coal, right? And there are no coal capacities, of course, Greenland and some parts of Europe and Middle East and so on and so forth, Africa, of course, for different reasons. There are lots of fossil fuels here, no coal sources or financial investments in building coal plants to import coal and so on, whereas China and India, of course, rely a lot, and so does Japan to some extent, and South Korea. Japan did get spooked after the Fukushima nuclear accident and started to backtrack on investments in new nuclear plants, but they have slowly begun to come back to nuclear. Germany, which was dead set against nuclear, is slowly thinking more about nuclear after what has happened under the Russian invasion of Ukraine, for example. So this energy dynamics, energy politics, especially coal politics, keep changing all the time. But the main point to remember is that this is a global problem. So although China comprises about half of existing and planned coal capacities, other countries cannot be neglected. Indeed, if all the phase-in countries continue to embrace coal, their aggregate emissions could surpass those of China. The emissions from coal plants already planned or underway in these countries will exceed those of all coal plants that currently operate in India, for example. So every group is important. In India, there was just a recent discussion this morning among my friends on a WhatsApp group saying Europe is being hypocritical in telling India and China to cut back on coal, while they're also putting pressure on India to not import oil from Russia because of the Ukraine invasion and so on. They themselves have backtracked to using coal because of this disruption of their gas supply from Russia. So this kind of geopolitics keeps going on. So each country is on its own, and they have different local political and development pressures. So the goal is to work together so that those who can phase out, who can afford to phase out, obviously can, which tend to be kind of the OECD countries, Organization of Economically Cooperating and Developing Countries, and high income countries, whereas those who are phasing in tend to be very poor countries, and those who are in the middle are trying to grow an economy and taking energy from wherever they can get to grow the economy, like India and China. Okay, so let's leave it there for now.